Welcome to Music Ed Tech Talk, a show about music, education, and technology. I'm your host, Robby Burns. Hey, it's me, Robby, and this is my second back-to-back solo episode talking about apps in my workflow. In the last episode, I kind of just went over all of the apps that I use the most regularly, specifically the ones that are on the dock and the home screens of my Mac and iOS devices. And I just went at that, from that perspective, because those tend to be the apps that are most frequently being clicked on, whether it's because they're like always running or just because like I really need to, want to have the icon accessible to me when I do open them. And so I figured that was like a good way to go about it. There are actually, I've been thinking over the past few days since recording that episode that there are lots of little tiny apps and utilities that run in the background that don't have app icons on my dock, or that like just serve like for like little single purposes here and there, but that are still extraordinarily useful. And so actually I'm kind of wondering if maybe I should do like a B side to that episode soon. But that's not what I'm going to do today. Today I'm going to talk about specifically just the note-taking apps in my workflow. So I kind of brushed over them in the last episode, thinking that I could get some meaning out of going into them in more detail. I used when I was preparing to record this, I realized I've used quite a lot of note apps over the years, and my philosophy about them has changed over time. So let's get straight into it. I want to first just start off by thanking the Patreon supporters of the show, and it is just awesome to have support from people who listen, and it helps a lot to cover the tools that I use to make and host the show. And so, to those of you doing that, I thank you. And to those who might want to support the show in one way or another, you can do so over at patreon.com/musicedtechtalk. Come on over. One of the perks of all tiers is you get to join our Discord server. And we've been talking about, lately, a couple things going on in the news. There's been some AI useful ? Chat happening in there lately. There's been some chat about the Apple Creator Studio, which is actually my first mini topic of the day. So I'm going to get into that. These apps actually all came out today. If you want to listen to my overview of it in the last episode, you can check out that one, episode 93. But I'll cover most of it again today. I've spent an extremely limited amount of time with these apps. This is Apple's new suite that includes what previously was all of their creative professional tools like Logic, Final Cut, Compressor, Mainstage, and Motion. And now they're throwing in with that Pixelmator Pro, which was an acquisition of a Photoshop Illustrator competitor that Apple made a while back. And by paying monthly, you get all of these apps in addition to their iPad counterparts where they exist. But they're also bundling into them premium features for the iWork suite, which I guess I don't know for how long Apple will call them the iWork suite. I guess they're part of the Creative Bundle now. And that includes Numbers, Pages, Keynote, and now the Freeform app, which is like Apple's whiteboard app for collaborating on content that uses lots of mixed media. It's a cool app. I like it. And so kind of like just a couple of quick takeaways, and then maybe I'll get into this more in the coming episodes as me and future guests have had some time to spend with it. I don't really think any person these days should be paying Adobe for their tools unless you work in an industry that depends on specifically a tool and like sharing back and forth file types like Photoshop files, for example. Adobe is so crazy expensive, and I just, there was a while where I did pay for some of their photo stuff. I don't know. These days there's so many competitors like Affinity. The new Affinity app that's now owned by Canva came out like recently, and that's just like, publishing and photo editing and illustrating tools all in the same app, but for free and like a little bit integrated with Canva. So that's one really compelling option. I think this new Apple Creator Studio, like the Pixelmator being included in that, is like a really good option. I mean, Pixelmator is like just a really nice app, and it borrows some conventions from Photoshop, but I feel like it presents everything in a much more intuitive way, which is probably why Apple bought them. That has for quite a long time been Apple's software brand, I think. And Pixelmator was already doing that before Apple bought them. And so now Apple has brought that up to the iPad along with several other things. So anyway, iWork being included in this bundle I think is weird, and that's kind of my first takeaway. I don't think it makes sense to make people who want premium iWork features pay for a bundle that includes a professional video editor. Like, that does not seem correct to me. And then the stuff that is premium inside of iWork is a little iffy. Like, okay, so like an example of a thing is like you can create AI, like use AI to make a keynote presentation based on some text. I don't feel like this works any better than any other chatbot that integrates up with like Canva or Google Slides. Like, I've tried using Claude and ChatGPT and a couple of these things to take some notes and say like, hey, can you just like get a presentation started for me? Can you just like, get it open, make the slides, do some headings and subheadings. And I feel like these things are just all like, this is kind of the promise of what they'll be good at and how they'll be useful to people. And I just feel like a lot of them are still flailing with connecting all the bits together meaningfully, even though the bits are there to be connected. This is kind of an area where I'm hoping Apple has a leg up and can be strong, is like how things integrate. But if at the end of the day, I don't know. I mean, we're years and years and years now into these chat models and being used by lots of people and developed pretty rigorously. And I just still feel like I said this in the last episode. I equated it to gambling. I mean, it's just really tough to expect it from anything. Whereas other automation tools, for example, just thinking about the Shortcuts app, which I've discussed at length on this show. When I program a shortcut, and I do it correctly and it works, it automates something, like even just as simple as something like logging a run or something, or like logging a food item that I ate, or like opening a lesson plan. Like, it works the same way every time I click the button. There's never any chance it's not going to do what I programmed it to do. I mean, it's a system that I created. And similarly, like, if it doesn't work, it's because of a bug or because of something I did wrong. Like, and that's addressable, but also something that can be replicated and expected, which is not how I feel about AI tools automating stuff. So I don't know. I mean, I still feel like an AI sort of like getting the general, it's kind of like asking an AI to like format, like the month and days of like a giant lesson planning document and just having it do all like the busy formatting stuff. That's kind of a pain. Like, I feel like these things can be sometimes kind of good at that. But again, like when it comes to automating and scripting like the tasks that you can do inside of an application, I don't know. I gotta play with it more, but I'm just not seeing it come into fruition yet. So dubious to me that is like out of the gate a paid feature of the iWork apps in this new Creative Suite. Final Cut, I haven't done this yet, but I have read that Final Cut can now analyze all the text of your videos. You can search things by what words are said in the video. I think that's awesome. I can't find if this is now in Logic too, but I can't imagine it would be super hard for Apple to add this. And that's actually where I would really like it, because I edit this show. Well, thanks to Jay from the New York desk for doing so much editing over the past year. But when I do edit in Logic, things with words in them, I would love to be able to search them by word and just jump straight to specific spots. So I don't know. I mean, I think obviously that's a super feature for a video editor. I hope that comes to Logic sometime soon. Oh, there's also like a beat matching thing where if you want to sync like cuts in the video to a background song, it can like detect the beat of the music and like make that easier. It's kind of cool. Pixelmator Pro on the iPad is great. I feel nothing but good feelings from that being there. I kind of feel like a little bit, I do tend to do some of this like heavier lifting creative stuff on the Mac, but having the Apple Pencil hooked right up to the iPad is definitely going to make me use that from time to time. Yeah, I feel mixed about it, but I mostly feel good about it. I think for like $30 a year, this is kind of a no-brainer for a teacher to have if you're using Apple stuff, specifically Logic Pro, I think. And, and this is not to mention too, like I don't talk about MainStage on here a whole lot, but like I'm curious if what they do with MainStage, like if it gets, I haven't really looked into like what the new features are, if they literally just gave it a new icon and included it in this bundle. But MainStage is a pretty cool app and has tons of wide-ranging uses. I mean, this is like a great tool if you like are a pit, working in a pit of like a high school musical, and you need to like have a keyboard with a bunch of patches preloaded. It's great for like all sorts of like live sound and performance related things. I should probably find a MainStage expert to come on here and talk to me about it. I personally would love to use MainStage more. I use Logic as kind of just a catch-all for everything, but there's this, a lot of times where I just have Logic open just because I want to access like loops and beats and software instruments for teaching, just for my band to play along to and for my private students to play along to instead of a metronome. And it's really kind of a heavy tool for that. Like that's really what MainStage is for, is just having a bunch of patches loaded up and triggerable without like having the whole entire weight of a digital audio workstation taking up your CPU at the same time. Okay, that's enough about Apple Creative Studio for now. What's new in AI? Like I just talked about AI a little bit. My trust in these things is diminishing, even as it seems like there is some movement to get these things to be better at integrated and more useful as tools. I'll give a good example of this. Like OpenAI and Anthropic, who make ChatGPT and Claude, have like announced that they're going to integrate with the Apple Health app this past couple weeks. These announcements have come out. In fact, I think Claude does it already. Like calculating, I know I'm bringing up nutrition calculating. I'm like trying to eat more protein. That's where this is all coming from. So I'm counting things a little bit, and I just think it's an interesting sort of playground for like AI, because like food, like caloric information and like this kind of like nutrition data is like out there and like widespread, and there's some general consensus as to like what conventions and norms are and like what are healthy things. I mean, there's like a lot of reasons why an LLM like could potentially like synthesize this data, give it to you, or synthesize data you give it, and then like do something simple like like you tell your chatbot like I just ate like 4 eggs and a handful of spinach, and then have that tell you like this much protein is in there. Like that's a useful thing. But it's just been funny because like I've been reading about people who very bravely have been integrating these tools, which I absolutely, by the way, do not recommend you give one of these third-party chatbots access to your health data, by the way. I would not recommend that. But I'm reading about it, of course, and I'm seeing that like the actual like results are just so lackluster and unpromising, like and inconsistent. That's the main thing, is like inconsistent. Like if you're one of these things is gonna be useful, it again has to be able to be dependent on. Like one thing I read on, I believe it was on The Verge, was that like someone who has been using this early access of the ChatGPT Apple Health integration, like there were times where it like would not recognize or pull data that the user had opted to give it, like something as simple as age, like am I drinking enough water for my, and then you would think if you gave it access to your age and some other basic stats about yourself, like it could use that data, but it was the repeat instances of it not even looking consistently or accurately at the things that had been given. And I just find this bananas. Like to me, I'm looking at this as sort of a representation of like what this stuff could be useful for. I don't know. It doesn't give me good vibes. That's for sure. So that's my what's in AI today. Health integration, useful? ? Maybe not yet. And then of course, like, what are you willing to trust your AI with remains a question that people are going to have to continue to ask, especially if later this year we get like a wide-reaching Siri overhaul on Apple devices that wants to know stuff about the data on your computer. And I would expect, and I would love to actually to hear from you if you are like kind of feeling like a power user on Android, because I know that Google Gemini has been integrated into the Android operating system for some time now and promises to do some similar stuff. I've had some pretty similarly bad experiences using Gemini to try to do things with data that are in apps that I know my Google account has access to, like something as simple as adding a calendar event. Like I tried to have Gemini add an event to a specific calendar in my Google Calendar recently, and it was like not even aware that calendar existed. It was like, hey, you only have one calendar. It's the default one. And I'm like, well, no, I have several other ones. And it's like, yeah, we can't see those. And I'm like, you're Google. Like, what do you mean? That to me, that's like right there. It's like, okay, what are we even doing here? Okay, so I'm done being negative about chatbots and moving on to the big topic of today, which is the many notes of Robby Burns. That's me. So what I think is important to note here is, did you see what I did there? I didn't do that on purpose. I didn't mean to do that. What I think is important here is that Notes apps are kind of like task apps. I always feel like I've been searching for the perfect one of these things. And what this does is it makes it kind of like has put me in the attitude of like, maybe there's one of these apps that can kind of do everything. And so this has been kind of a software philosophy that I've bounced around with, is like, should I use lots of apps that are good at single purpose things, or one app to rule them all? Where I've landed is several apps that do specific things, though there are a couple of apps along my journey that I'll mention that have kind of tried to do everything. I mean, I'll start with Apple Notes. Since Apple Notes is my primary note-taking app now, I will say that Apple Notes does try to do everything, and I'd say it's largely pretty successful at doing most of the things a note app can do. I think it's where I currently have landed, mostly because of its simplicity and because of how well it integrates into all of my devices, which I'm going to talk about more in a moment. In history, it has had limitations. Like, it's a lot more fully featured now than it was 6 or 7 years ago. I think back a decade plus ago, Evernote was my main thing. You can listen back way far back on this show and hear me talking about Evernote. It used to be the subject of all my presentations. It gets a huge chunk of my book even. And I think Evernote was this concept of the everything bucket. Like, it'll take any data you throw into it. It'll clip websites as HTML. It'll take PDFs and make them text searchable. It'll do to-do lists. It'll, like literally anything. The text, plain text. It has rich text editing tools. And Evernote was just always like that app, trying to do everything. But as the company shifted its focus and continued to go in a direction I wasn't happy with and charge more money, and then eventually got bought by a private equity, it just continued to be less and less what I wanted, and Apple Notes continued to get better and better. And then other apps started to come out that were also really good. So I'll give some examples of these. So like one app that is, if you're on Apple platforms, pretty good, is the Bear Note app, which is just a Markdown app. Markdown being like a syntax for HTML. So you can write in plain text, and then the app can register certain kinds of keystrokes as like a first heading or a second heading or bold or italics. And that was a Note app that seemed pretty interesting for a while. But I did miss some of the basic stuff, like just being able to drag a PDF or an image into something and then have it be searchable, which is, by the way, something that Apple Notes does not to this day do a super good job of. Like, I'm still kind of missing that from Evernote. And then I kind of, for a while, was trying DEVONthink, which is arguably not even really a note app, but it is a database app on the Mac and on iOS devices where you can kind of just throw anything into it. Like, you can clip websites, you can throw in documents, you can have it like archive and reference and index like folders on your hard drive. Like, you can just have this thing point to literally everywhere. Like, you could even point it to an RSS feed. Like, I have it pointing to my blog, and it just pulls the HTML down off of all of my blog posts and makes them searchable. And that is like truly like a very useful thing to have. Now, I think the app is a little too big for its own good, and I have had a lot of syncing issues, and that mixed with its complexity ultimately led me away from it. And actually, I really did try to work with it in quite a lot of detail. I've even been very active on the message boards and the user forums, and I've always found that when I ran into issues with how I was using it, the development team would be very, not like rude, maybe rude even, like just kind of like dismissive of the way I was trying to use their tool. Like, I was not, like something like I would put a lot of data in it and then it wouldn't sync very reliably. And then they would say like, well, don't put so much data in it. And I'm like, well, you made the app. Like, this is what it says it does. And so like, I'm sorry that I'm not using your app correctly, but like, if you make an app that allows you to throw a lot of data into it and then you make it sync like that, it should be able to handle that. I shouldn't have to like do things like look at, this has happened to me before on other really complex apps I've used for things like task management, where like, oh, you need to maybe like archive your old data, or you need to run like a log of like an error log and like send it to us. And like, that's all fine and good and never really led good places for me, at least with regards to DEVONthink. But like, I would never think about that with something like Evernote. Never have to think about that. It would just work. Now, it was ugly and over time became an increasingly poor experience in many regards. So I, of course, stopped using Evernote as well. But it always did work the way it said it was going to work. So DEVONthink ultimately didn't land for me. I still have it installed, and I occasionally, I have like a humongous database. Actually, DEVONthink can import from a lot of different places, and that's where all my Evernote stuff currently lives. Like I did a big giant import, brought all my Evernote stuff in. So like all of my college, like constant programs and documents and articles and stuff that I've scanned. Like I just have a lot of stuff that I've scanned over the years that still is only in DEVONthink, and probably I should use it, move it to my file system at one point or another, but I haven't done that yet. So DEVONthink might work for you though. I mean, if you're looking for, like, DEVONthink is really appealing to people who do lots of research and need to draw connections between their different documents and data, and I think it can be very, very good at that. It also supports a thing I really like when apps do, where you can just create a URL to whatever data inside of the app you are looking at, and then paste that anywhere else, which is awesome. The next app I want to talk about is Drafts, and Drafts is the starting point for all text. At least that's how it's advertised. That's how for a long time I used it. I still do use it. I use it less often these days, just because sometimes if I know something is a note, I'll just directly put it right in Apple Notes. But there are a lot of times where I will still put things in Drafts first, because Drafts allows you a super clean interface for just typing text without thinking about it too hard. And then it has an action directory where you can like tap on an action and then like it'll send it to that app. So you can start typing something and realize, oh, this is an email draft. And then you can have a one-tap button to open it up as an email draft inside of your email app, or as a message in your text message app. I mean, and it's like the paid version has like all this extensibility. Like people can create their own actions, and then you can install them from their website, and then you can do things like, you can have the whole entire conversations with ChatGPT instead of a draft now. You can send things to your to-do app, to Apple Reminders. You can do all sorts of stuff. It's like honestly one of the most powerful apps. It's like on the front end, like getting thoughts into it, one of the most simple apps I've ever used. And then on the back end, getting data out of it, it's infinitely programmable and complex. I like it. Okay, so this brings me to the personal knowledge management section. And this is kind of a new category of apps that I've been digging into over the past 4 years. I'll link in the show notes an episode I did with Dr. Corey Meals introducing this topic of apps and talking about the next 3 I'm going to mention in pretty big detail. So the first one is Obsidian. And Obsidian is an app that looks at your text files. You just basically point it to a folder full of text files, and then it lets you view those kind of as like more of a database. And when I say database, versus like a document style, I'm thinking to myself, okay, like if you've got like Word docs stored in certain places on your computer's hard drive, that's like document style organization. Whereas like a database style would be something more like, well, Apple Notes, where like you don't actually like look around your hard drive for your notes. They're just all stored inside of the app. So Obsidian is like document based in the sense that it's looking at a folder of your documents, but it's presenting it to you in a database kind of format where you can like navigate, organize, search, and find all these documents inside of the Obsidian interface. And so their argument is that because everything is just in plain text, you can always trust that you can take that data elsewhere pretty easily if Obsidian is no longer in business, or if you want to move to another app. And I really like that idea on principle. I also like kind of the idea of how it deals with things like formatting and images and documents. You can still drag images into a note and see them fully rendered as you would in a regular note-taking app. It's just that what Obsidian is doing is sort of like bringing that note into your database and then like linking to it using Markdown again, which is kind of like a short. It's basically, imagine like if you're making a website and you need to have an image appear on a website, you would like import that image, and then you might in HTML write a line of code that references that image. So that's kind of what Obsidian is doing, is it's using like web technologies to, when you bring in an image, it's just showing it to you. What you see is what you get. But actually what's happening under the hood is that image is stored somewhere else in your Obsidian database, and what's actually in the text file is just a line of code linking to that note. So it's an interesting model. It's a really interesting way of doing things. I like it. it ultimately has been mostly replaced by a combination of Apple Notes and Craft, which is my next one I'm going to talk about. I will link a video I did several years back on YouTube showing off Craft, because I think it's the kind of thing where when you see it in action, it just clicks for you how valuable this tool is. And Craft does several of the things that Obsidian does, and these other personal knowledge management apps, which is where you can I didn't mention this when I was just talking about Obsidian, but you can, in a wiki style, you can kind of link your notes to other notes, which is a really powerful way of connecting your data. Now, Craft is prettier and nicer looking. In fact, I use it a lot. I'll share something with someone, and they'll be like, oh, wow, what is this nice Google Docs? To them, it's oh, this is what Google Docs should be. In fact, what differentiates Craft from Obsidian, other than how nice it is to use, is that it is really good at sharing stuff on the web. You can just click a button and then get a URL that you can share with another person, and you can either share it with them as an editable collaborative doc, kind of like a Google Doc, or you can just publish a link that just takes them to viewing it, kind of like a website. In fact, lots of things that I used to build on my personal and my school's music department website, I now just build in Craft because they're just simple information. They're things that I'm sharing with very specific targeted groups of people, not necessarily things that the whole entire world needs to have access to. So Craft is super at this. You can make really, really nice documents that have lovely formatting and images and links embedded, and things can link to other things. You can build a whole wiki. My entire music program's informative hub of stuff for our students and families is all built in Craft as an interconnected network of essentially just text information with embedded images and links. And it's infinitely easier to do that than to put it all on our website, which requires logging in and lots of dragging and dropping blocks around. Craft is as easy to use as Microsoft Office. Easier, actually, so much easier. So I can edit a typo in the Craft app on one of my devices and then just know that that typo immediately is getting pushed to the web where a student might view it or look at it. And then, of course, there's Notion, which is, of these personal knowledge management apps, Obsidian, Craft, Notion, it's the, I would say it is the one that does the most stuff. And it is probably the most automatable and the most powerful of them. Now, it comes with some downsides. It's not as nice to use, and it's probably doing more things than it really needs to be able to do, but that makes it powerful as well. And they seem to be the most advanced in terms of integrating with these AI tools. So again, if this ever proves to be a thing that can more reliably work, you could potentially link it up to your ChatGPT and say hey, I need you to make me a database of the music that's in my music library based on this list right here, and then just have it make you a spreadsheet inside of its, a note inside of your Notion. Notion, like Craft, is very easy to share and collaborate, folders of notes or entire notes. It does all the wiki linking stuff. What I think it's good at that Obsidian and Craft will do, but what Notion is far more powerful at, is relational database stuff. So it actually even replaces kind of what you could do with FileMaker or Airtable, in the sense that some of your notes can be spreadsheets, and then you can make a spreadsheet that links data from one spreadsheet to another spreadsheet. So, for example, you can have a list of concerts that you've performed and a list of music in your library, and then you could have a third spreadsheet that links instances of performances. You could say, I performed this piece on this concert, and then have that third spreadsheet meaningfully link the data between the list of concert dates and the list of music repertoire in a way that's all connected and doesn't require you to duplicate your data in several places. I could honestly see myself moving what I currently use, Google Docs and iWork and several other notes. I could see myself really putting almost all of my work in Notion. In fact, it's been lately kind of hard to not, but for the time being, I'm just still kind of waiting it out and looking at these features. And by the way, Notion, I believe, has not a whole lot of limits if you use an educational account. So if you have in your school system, a single sign-on that includes Google Docs. I sign in through my Google credentials using my school's Google account, and I don't really have any limits to how I use the app. So I think educators currently do get most of the power of it for free, last I checked. Craft, just to mention, does work completely, but has extreme limits on how much data you can put into it before you pay. And then Obsidian is completely free, and you can sync your data over their servers or publish using paid tools and subscriptions that they offer. But if you want to just use it as like your own personal network of information that lives on your computer, you can just use it entirely for free. And you can also sync it over iCloud, or I guess also like Dropbox or any of these other kinds of things. Syncing platforms. All right, next up is, what am I actually using these days? So I mentioned I'm kind of back on Apple Notes, and I'm really enjoying being back on Apple Notes just because it is very powerful and it balances simplicity with that power. Like, it doesn't get in my way and put buttons on the screen that confuse and distract me, that do things that I never will really want to do. Like, they've done a good job balancing it. It integrates great with my devices. Every Apple device I own has several ways I can create a quick note. My favorite of which is on the iPad. If the iPad screen is sleeping and I double tap the pencil to it, it will automatically create a new handwritten note and I can just start writing. If the iPad screen is on, I can drag with the tip of the Apple Pencil from the lower right corner of the screen to create a little tiny note that sort of hovers over my other apps. Creating notes with Siri is awesome. I just like, using sharing features is cool. Like, I have a shared family note that I do some like house project stuff and some finances with my wife in. We just did like family, like gift shopping, this past holiday season. I manage this show with a shared notebook with, like, for example, like I put all of the show notes in like notes for this episode and others in a place where Jay from the New York desk can get to them. When I've had student teachers in the past, I'll share a whole notebook with them where we can like do shared lesson planning. We can share resources. My music team has a shared notebook for like concert date planning and just drafting messages we send out as a team. Like, there's just all sorts of cool stuff you can do with the sharing. Now, of course, Apple Notes only runs on Apple platforms. You can get to it from a non-Apple device through the web, but it's not a good experience at all. In fact, it's quite bad. Some other apps have found their way back into my workflow in addition to Apple Notes. Like I said, I'm using Drafts. I sometimes will still start a note in Drafts and then later send it to Apple Notes or somewhere else if more appropriate. One thing I really like about Drafts is it has live activities support. So sometimes I just need to have like a persistent note to myself for the day, like almost like, just think like a sticky note. And I love how you can pin a note in Drafts and then it'll just like stick to your phone's lock screen. So like if I just have something that I want to be thinking about all day, it can be as simple as like, I don't know, like an affirmation or a mantra. I'm not into that kind of stuff. But if I just have something I want to be persistently like reminded to think about, but that is not necessarily a task, I'll put it in a draft. I have actually a designated draft called Today. And in the morning, in my Good Morning shortcut that automates when I stop my morning alarm, it'll launch that activity onto my lock screen of my phone. And I can change it to say whatever I want. Lately, it's reminding me that I just need to be mindful of our house, the smart stuff in our house, because the temperature in a couple of rooms of our house is like uses baseboard heating, and I'm just trying to monitor that and be more mindful of like keeping those rooms a good temperature, but also like not just running our baseboard heaters all day long. So that's one of the things that my draft live activity has reminded me to do. If I have like one huge task of the day that's not really like a single checkable task, but it's just a thing I need to be very focused on, I find that sometimes I'll put that in that live activity and just be constantly reminded of it every time I look at my phone. Like some days I just have to like drop my to-do list and just be focused on one thing. And that can be pretty important. I also have on the lock screen of my phone a custom widget that when I tap it, it just launches me straight into creating a new draft. Really useful. All right, I already kind of mentioned what I'm using Craft for. Craft does have a cool feature I didn't mention earlier called the Daily Note. And the Daily Note is a note that's just for the day. It's got a calendar interface on the left side where you can just see all the dates in the month, and you can create a note for each day. I love this for lesson planning and just reminding myself like what I need to announce to each of my classes if there's important stuff. If I need to pass out, like this past week, I needed to pass out all-state band music to a couple of students who made it into the band and remind them to take their how extra important it is to bring instruments home when we get knocked out for snow for several days, which is what's happening right now. It's snowing outside, and I'm sitting at home on a snow day. Craft does just lots of cool things. Oh, with that daily note, also, you can have it look at the calendar events in your calendar, and then you can actually create a note for an event. So because I put all of my classes in my calendar, when I have something like a sectional, like a wind ensemble clarinet sectional, I can create a note based on that event that lives inside of my Craft daily note for that day. And I can write things I assigned, things I graded. And then I can, just kind of just some general notes, like this person didn't seem happy with their grade, and maybe that's a follow-up conversation. Or maybe I need to reteach this because nobody was really getting it. Or, wow, we're all like learning the notes and rhythms, but phrasing is a thing. Maybe there's some like daily warm-ups I can do to address this in the full band rehearsal. I know colleagues who share notes using the Craft shared feature. They'll like share with individual students, like where they're at in the method book, like individual and differentiated progress through the method book. And you can, because it's like got that wiki style linking, you could technically like have the names of your students linked inside of your notes where you're taking notes on them, just to kind of like get around and connect the dots of data. The dots of data? The bits of data? I don't know. I'm working on that metaphor. But you can do that so much more easily when every piece of data inside of your note app can be linked to another. By the way, speaking of Apple Notes a lot this episode, you can now do a little bit of this backlinking inside of Apple Notes too. If you hit the greater than sign twice and then start typing in the name of a note, it'll start showing you options to link to other notes inside of that note. And you may have noticed too that some people take notes in Google Docs, which, that's not my cup of tea, but it's valid. And you can do this kind of thing for a while now in Google Docs as well, which I like to believe is Google's response to these PKM apps. I haven't stopped using Obsidian because there's always a place in my workflow for text files. So I definitely do use it to access them sometimes and to just sort of I'll play around in there a little bit. One thing I didn't mention when I introduced it earlier in this episode is that there is a user community who makes plugins, most of which are free, that you can just install into your Obsidian database and then edit the functionality of the app. Everything from how the user interface of the app behaves to I'm trying to think of some pretty good ones that I've used lately. I know some people who have made ones that integrate with my task app, which is Things by Culture Code. And there are people who've made plugins where you can hit a keyboard shortcut and then whatever line of text you're on in your Obsidian note will make that line of text a to-do inside of Things and then backlink them to each other. So that line of text in Obsidian links to the task in Things, and then the task in Things links back to that node in Obsidian. And somebody just coded that, and I got the benefit of installing that for free. It's kind of fun. I think of plugins as a thing that's in software like a digital audio workstation or a video editor. But to have them in a text app, for notes, it's just a basic productivity tool, is actually quite powerful and makes me wish that more of my apps that I do basic everyday tasks in had these kinds of plugin architectures. So I do use GoodNotes, mostly for handwritten stuff, and I use it primarily on my iPad. And what I do is it's really good at letting you create a paper style, which sort of, for an individual notebook inside of GoodNotes, kind of just becomes the default that you see. So instead of just creating a new page and seeing a blank white canvas, I'll bring in a PDF copy of my seating chart, and then I'll have a whole notebook inside of GoodNotes, which is called concert band seating charts. And then every time I swipe to the next page, I just get an empty copy of my seating chart that I can scribble on. And I love being able to annotate that seating chart and write notes on how kids are doing every day, write who's missing their instrument, who's absent, who might need some assistance with things. You just write anything you want on it super informally with the Apple Pencil. You can even have it on half the screen with your 4-score sheet music on the other half. And it's just like it's a real good workflow. It syncs to the Mac version of the app, where I sometimes will compare it up against a rubric to generate some grades. That's the other thing too, is I can like take little notes on student performances as well, in a way that's a little bit less disruptive to my flow and has me not quite as much like buried inside of my learning management software, but where I can easily use it to refer back to that class and, later link it up and make some meaningful connections to my gradebook when I'm working in Canvas. And then, of course, there's like your to-do app, like my to-do app things and several others that I've mentioned on this show, like Todoist and OmniFocus. They have a field in your task called Notes. And you can do quite a lot. Like Things has markdown support in Notes, so you can do like headings and subheadings inside of the Notes field of a task. OmniFocus and Todoist lets you just dump images and documents inside of your Notes field. Like there's quite a lot of things you can do if you're a more task-centric person and you want your interface to just be checkable lines of text, but then you want to be able to expand those into more context. I could totally see myself doing more of my note-taking just right inside of the To-Do Manager. Of course, you can also interlink these apps because several of them allow you to generate, much like DEVONthink or Obsidian or Craft, generate a URL which will link you directly inside of that note. And there's a cool Mac app I've been digging lately that I've talked about on here before called Hookmark, which for apps that don't have a deep linking feature, what Hookmark does is it runs in the background and then you invoke it with a keyboard shortcut. And then like whatever app you're looking at, it'll generate a URL, which will take you into that piece of data. So like whether you're looking at a file in the Finder or a specific Apple note, or you've got like a Microsoft Word document open, like it'll generate a URL, which will link you straight into whatever data you're currently looking at, which you can then put in the notes field of a to-do app. So I kind of do a lot of that, like creating my own breadcrumbs, so to speak, to link data from one app to the other. And this is how I get away with using several different note apps. So that's kind of my philosophy, is Apple Notes for most things, and then a couple of side tools for specific other things. The only reason I kind of call all these things note apps is because they are all referential, which is to me the core of what makes a note app a note app. It's just a place where you can like create some information and then later look at it. And, that's kind of what I consider to be notes. I tend to put anything that does not require regular editing inside of a note app. And as you can tell, even some things that I do regularly edit just make more sense in a note app. Like, we don't need to have a shared Google Doc on my music team for concert dates when we can put that inside of a note, which is much more easy to get to and format without having to like dig around for it on our computer. Actually, just to tell you, we actually keep that in Craft these days because that is information that our students and families also need. So we have just one sort of place to rule all of that information and one place where it's edited and maintained, which also doubles as a website for our music program. So that's it. That's my 2026 note-taking workflow. I didn't think this episode would feel longer to record than my one about all of my apps from last time, but it certainly did. So hope it was helpful to you. Would love to hear from you if you have other things you think are worth talking about in a future episode regarding notes. Until then, have a good one. Thanks for listening to Music Ed Tech Talk. I hope you subscribe to the show and review it in your favorite podcast app. You can find me at robbyburns.com. The show is edited by Jay Matejko. Design work is by Ryan Bailey. Everything else is by me. See you next time.